Pada 8 Ogos 1967, 5 pemimpin dari Indonesia, Malaysia, Filipina, Singapura dan juga Thailand menandatangani satu dokumen di bangunan Kementerian Luar Thailand di Bangkok, dan ini adalah permulaan bagi ASEAN. Pada hari Sabtu ini ataupun pada hari ini, ASEAN menyambut ulang tahun yang ke-53 dengan sedikit kesuraman susulan COVID-19 yang melanda dunia dan juga rantau ini. Sehingga 4 Ogos 290,000 kes COVID-19 dilaporkan di ASEAN dengan sekitar 7,000 kematian. Kita ingin melihat kepada ASEAN secara lebih dekat pada ulang tahun ke-53 dan juga bagaimana ASEAN harus mengambil peluang yang hasil ataupun yang wujud daripada pandemik COVID-19 untuk bergerak ke hadapan dan melihat kepada peluang untuk melihat kepada the ASEAN Way yang baru. Dan bersama kita melalui Skype adalah penyidik Center for Strategic and International Studies Indonesia, Bapak Gilang Kembara. Bapak, pertama sekali Bapak, 53 years is quite a significant milestone for a regional organisation. What do you make of ASEAN at 53, having gone through many forms and now with a larger presence and also influence?
Well, hello Rizal. Thank you for inviting me in. I'm glad to be here at Astro. And 53 years of ASEAN, like rightly mentioned, is no easy feat. It's a very big achievement for a regional organization. And I might say that for ASEAN, one of the biggest achievements that we had in the past 53 years or so is that we have managed to tone down, or at least does not have any open conflict, any major conflict within the region. Now, this is significant in part because unlike the EU, the ASEAN, the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, even though it only has 10 member states, it is very significant because all 10 member states are different in a way in their political backgrounds. We have absolute monarchy, for example, in Brunei Darussalam. We have single-party states in Vietnam. We have multi-party democracy like Indonesia, and also other democracies like in Malaysia. And so we are a variety of nations, I might say, and yet we manage in those decades past that we managed to come together to mend broken fences and build bridges among each other. Of course, there are still a lot of homeworks to be done. Of course, there are still a lot of there are still holes to be covered. But at this stage, we managed to keep going on. We signed deals, we agreed to cooperate and so on. And I do believe that this endeavor would strive on for decades to come.
Interestingly, you mentioned the EU in your answer. Do you think a regional organization should aspire to be like the European Union? That seems to be the standard, the gold standard for a regional cooperation organization. Do you think ASEAN should aspire to be like the EU after 53 years of its formation?
I think if there is one thing that we can share, if there is one thing similar perhaps between the ASEAN and the EU as of now, is that we use English as our working language. But then I wouldn't say that the EU needs to be the final form of ASEAN itself. ASEAN is constructed in a whole different aspects than the EU. For example, we have ASEAN Way, which forms through consensus, through the agreement of all 10 ASEAN member states. The EU does not have that. So ASEAN takes into account of each of its 10 member states of what needs to be done, of what the course needs to be taken in the future. And as such, it leaves no country behind. It takes its approach, might I say, steadily, although somewhat perhaps would say too slow. But then it covers, it also due to the fact, again, maybe if I can make another distinction of ASEAN, is that in terms of economics, for example, you have a very highly developed country like Singapore in ASEAN, and yet you still have a number of developing countries within the region, like Cambodia, Myanmar, even Indonesia to an extent. So we are very diverse. With the EU, there might be more homogeneous in a sense of economic-wise, but then again, their path that they've chartered are different than that towards ASEAN, for example. So I wouldn't say that it's something that we can go to aspire to, but some elements might be able to be emulated for the idea of a prosperous Southeast Asian region.
Let's look at the ASEAN way. You mentioned the ASEAN way. Many parties or many people have criticized the ASEAN way as being a bit too slow. Do you think this COVID-19 would be a good opportunity for ASEAN to relook at the ASEAN way and maybe address some regional issues faster?
I think it is a momentum. It is a momentum for 10 ASEAN member states and ASEAN itself to observe what are the key issues that are pressing, what needs to be done in the short term and also in the long term. And then by that, we can sort of amalgamize the collective effort. If I may put an anecdote that in the next 5 years, in 2025, ASEAN has its Vision 2025, right? ASEAN connectivity, whereas the fundamental idea is to connect all aspects of economics and social life, even down to trade and logistics and all that. And so, by that, what is one of the things that need to be concentrated on? The need to build and to develop from the very fundamental aspect of the lives of the Southeast Asian nations, from the 10 ASEAN member states. And then afterwards, and then even in the long term, then we need to think of it like a pyramid. We look at the bottom first. What needs to be layered? What bricks are there to be layered for the foundation? And then we go up really either slowly, either in a moderate pace, but then we shape up the form of the region, right, into like a pyramid. And so I believe that this is what we need to be done. We need to see the foundational bricks that we need to construct first. And some people would say that the consensus does drag ASEAN behind on certain issues, but it is in a sense that it goes down to the spirit that we are going, and that we do not leave any nation or at least any country behind in the decision-making process within the region. We're unlike the EU or any other regional organization.
So let's talk about this shift from being a five-member state, a five-member organization to a 10+6 regional organization. What do you see has changed so far in terms of the geopolitical presence, in terms of the economic presence, and the role that ASEAN can play at 53 this year, looking at the shift of power brought forth by COVID-19? Kita akan berhenti berehat seketika, kembali selepas ini. Bertemu kembali, kita bersama dengan Bapak Gilang Kembara, penyelidik Center for Strategic and International Studies Indonesia, membincangkan tentang ASEAN pada umur 53 tahun. As I said earlier, and you also mentioned earlier, that ASEAN is comprised diverse members. It started from 5 to now 10+6 partners. Do you see the power from 5 members to 10, there's a shift in power from being a small regional player to now with a good, solid economic and power presence on a global stage. What do you make of that shift?
I think this shift or perhaps expansion, if I may say, of ASEAN member states does put, I would say this as a positive way. I would look at this in a positive way. This increases, for example, first of all, the diversity of the ASEAN member states, and also the economic capability of the region in itself. Now, from the 10 ASEAN member states, we analyzed ASEAN into two sort of different regions: maritime Southeast Asia, and of course, mainland Southeast Asia. And both areas of these region comprises of a very different, how should I say, capabilities, and also they harness different sort of economic promises, I might say. Now, maritime Southeast Asia has been considered as the lifeline that connects between the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean through the Straits of Malacca, of course. And then mainland Southeast Asia is nonetheless is nonetheless important. It connects the Southeast Asia region to the overall, the big nation of China, and also the South Asian region. And so these two regions, though separate as they are, they connect us to the bigger world. And it expands our economic capability. It expands our horizon, expands our perspective into dealing to all corners of the region and also all corners of the world. So at this stage, expanding from 5 to 10 actually has made us more holistic, I might say. It encapsulates perfect circle that our connection towards the north, east, west, and south are otherwise completed. And so it's a perfectly balanced region, I'd say.
And its partnership with China, with Japan, with South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. What do you make of that? That's quite interesting, right?
Certainly, both three countries that you mentioned, they harness very different capabilities. Also, they have specialties that they would carry out their own. And without our partners, with our dialogue partners, without our development partners, ASEAN would certainly be either lagging behind or even growing in a more slower pace than we are, than some would consider. Mm-hmm. And so not only partnering with the three countries you mentioned, partnering with the other countries like the EU, or perhaps some partners in Europe and even in America, also help to provide us with strategic relationship, provide us with economic incentives, providing us with even diplomatic recognition or diplomatic power as well. Through the collection of the 10 ASEAN member states, ASEAN is somewhat many consider to be sort of like a middle power, right? One Southeast Asian countries may not be able to just be considered as strong as if it is put together in a 10-member regional organization. And as such, it by growing by working as one, all the 10 ASEAN member states, it'll make it much more easier, or at least much more better to cooperate with other countries throughout the world, I might say.
But do you think ASEAN realizes that it has this power, that it is the middle power, 10 nations with multiple partners? Do you think ASEAN realizes that it has this power and it has the ability to maybe change some, how things are done in some aspects, say the geopolitical security aspect of the region, the economic aspect of the region? Do you think ASEAN realizes and is using this power wisely?
I consider that some ASEAN member countries do recognize the potential as middle power. Indonesia has certainly echoed that sentiment for years, that it is a middle power and it conducts middle power diplomacy. I suggest Malaysia sometimes also consider itself in the same sphere. Although other ASEAN member states need to have, or at least still needs to have to be a bit more confirm about it, But again, through the collection of the 10 ASEAN member states, when ASEAN do meet and through their summits and everything, it strives and it helps to create the sense of togetherness. It helps to create the sense of the diplomatic unity, helps to create a sense of a, not national, but at least a regional unity. And as such, in that sort of capability, it exudes this sort of middle power diplomacy or middle power capability or so. But certainly the homework is that some of the ASEAN member states need to be realized of their current and also future potential within this diplomatic prowess.
Collectively, the ASEAN nations can be in the top 5, at least in the top 10 of the world's economy collectively. And we're looking, or ASEAN leaders are looking to conclude the RCEP discussion and ratify it by the end of, or before the end of 2020. Now ASEAN BAC, ASEAN Business Advisory Council, is pushing for that to happen much faster. Looking at how the global economy is behaving right now because of COVID-19. Tell us more about RCEP. especially when ASEAN is at 53 years old, and this could be the litmus test for how the region move forward in terms of getting that collective economic power?
Well, certainly a trade deal, or at least an economic deal like the RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, is very important in a way that it brings together not only the 10 ASEAN member states, but also states that are part or signatory to the deal. And I do believe that in this day and age, especially within the pandemic and the growing sense of economic, how should I say, trade protectionism, I'd say, it's certainly helpful to try to lower the sort of barriers that are needed for countries to conduct trade. And certainly trades that are beneficial to the people, not only for ASEAN, but also people around the region that would require essential equipments. And the pandemic sometimes does not help in a way that it leads to some country to stockpile, to protect their own logistics, to protect their own trade. But it is hopeful that economic deals such as RCEP, if it's possible to be completed in the soonest possible time, it helps to try to alleviate this sort of backlog or shortages or even logistic issues between countries.
Dan bertemu kembali, kita membincangkan tentang ASEAN pada 53 tahun bersama dengan Bapak Gilang Kembara, Peneliti Center for Strategic and International Studies Indonesia. Bapak, let's look at the increasing regionalization of trade, of influence, of geopolitical powers concentrating in a particular region. Right now, America is busy with its COVID-19 cases. Europe is also struggling to rebuild its economies after COVID-19. We have China in the ASEAN, in Asia, in Asia, trying to revive its manufacturing and production capacity and capabilities. The increasing regionalization of trade, of influence, what do you make of that, especially when people used to talk about globalization, but now people talk about globalization, but on a smaller scale, on a scale where people in member states can understand what globalization is. Tell us more about that.
That is true. There are critics that globalization is either retreating or perhaps outright should be just dead. However, and in its shoes we have regionalization. Now, I wouldn't say that I'm neither a proponent nor opponent of either of the ideas, but I do understand with the rise of regionalization, it helps to understand the necessity or the needs of the countries within the same region. For example, if I may take an example outside of our region, say Africa, for example. Through the African Union, they try to understand and they tried already to observe what exactly is the issue at hand within the continent of Africa. It either can be for food insecurity, sometimes it tackles on the issue of successionism, and then also terrorism and other non-traditional security. And by bonding all of the African states, they manage to at least cover some of those issues and manage it in the most perfect way possible. And that sort of logic and understanding holds true to an extent with Southeast Asia. And that by bonding into a group of 10, we at least try to observe what are our shortcomings, where are the gaps that needs to be plugged, and what could threaten us in, say, another year, 10 years, or 5 years. Although certainly no one would expect a pandemic of this scale happen, but nonetheless, if it happens, we try to mend it together instead individually, I might add.
But there are still many issues yet to be resolved in the ASEAN region itself. A standard for how people in different member states can travel to other member states. Right now, countries are dealing with their immediate neighbors to look at how they can open borders, but not on a regional level. And we know and we understand how regional travels, economic activities have helped the region to grow stronger in the past 10, 20 years. Looking at that, do you think ASEAN can do and should do better, faster? I mean, ASEAN is at 53 right this year. I mean, can it do faster? Can it do better to address a standard way to deal with COVID-19 at a regional basis, on a regional basis?
If I might add, on an ASEAN scale, on the scale of the regional organization, attempts have been made, and of course, decisions have been made between all the 10 ASEAN member countries. And I think some of those agreements, I might say, are quite timely, and some of the decisions made are relevant to the current condition. Of course, there are certain ideas that may have not been conducted in the most efficient manner. But now the question is not only for ASEAN itself. The question is supposed to be, do all the 10 ASEAN member countries are now capable, or at least have conducted the agreements that have been agreed before to manage or mitigate the spread of COVID-19. It's up to the capability of each 10 ASEAN member states to fulfill what have been agreed before. And as such, ASEAN can only do as best as the weakest, I'd say, or at least the weakest, if I may say, the weakest member state, right? It's only as good as the weakest member state. And so it's the capability then needs to be addressed of each countries, not only about ASEAN, but individually for the states, for the ASEAN member states.
How do you think COVID-19 will change ASEAN moving forward? Do you see better cooperation, better coordination, regional coordination? How do you see ASEAN after COVID-19?
What my biggest hope, and I do hope that this is something that ASEAN can either fix or at least make it better or so, is that human lives are not expendable. Yes, of course, populations still grow, but it harnessed a lot of potential. And losing that many lives now, I wouldn't know the regional figure, but I assume that the whole worldwide figure is about almost 700,000 at the moment. And losing at that many individuals, I'd say, has ripped the world of potentials that could be conducted in the future. And so how should I say this? Essential services, health security, even environment, climate change, for example. It's the fundamental aspect of human lives. And those changes affected human lives greatly. I do hope that whether it's the next 10 years or 25 years, for example, is that these aspects of human lives are taken well cared of. And that the idea that is not only the idea of prosperity, but also that people can live healthily, in a very healthy state. They can carry it out and conduct either businesses or any dealings in a safe manner, and that there is less, or at least very little, effects of, say, natural disasters because of a better disaster mitigation response or something. So these fundamental aspects of day-to-day lives, sometimes we think of it as mundane, or sometimes we think of it as very trivial, are actually, the small cogs that hold the economy together. And when we see that these small cogs are stopped working, you see the figures of economies all over the region slumping. And so it's in very dire need for countries to do whatever it takes to manage, or at least to consider that these small cogs, never stop working, or at least are working in a very steady pace in the future.
You see, why are you still very hopeful when it comes to ASEAN in the future moving forward?
I do believe that there's more to cooperation than there is for competition or animosity between neighbors. Rivalries, of course, are is a natural part of human lives, political lives. But managed correctly, it can produce positive impacts. For example, economic growth, um, ease of travel, of course, logistics, and many more. But when animosity grew into, for example, hatred, or at least when it grows into, point of no return, where one country certainly does not wish to engage in a positive manner with its neighbor, then it's pretty much in a deadlock, and there's nothing to grow, there's nothing to gain, and there's a possibility that the country would possibly go into a failed state. And cooperation, even though that it has its criticisms, but it does seek to achieve one thing, that is growth, that is prosperity, and also definitely at the very best is ease of doing businesses and etc. So why would we settle for something otherwise? Why would we go for the other spectrum that does not promise anything good? If there is something, albeit slowly, but has potential and bigger potential once we open each door, slowly or fast, I suppose. So hopefully that does answer your question.
Thank you very much. On that note, we thank you very much Bapak Gilang Kembara, Peneliti Center for Strategic and International Studies Indonesia, membincangkan berkenaan dengan ulang tahun ke-53 ASEAN. Satu peristiwa yang bermula pada 1967 di Bangkok. Kita terus membincangkan berkenaan dengan ASEAN dan juga COVID-19 serta respon ASEAN kepada COVID-19. Untuk ke ulang tahun ke-53 ini, kami di Astro Awani mengucapkan selamat hari ulang tahun ke-53 untuk ASEAN. Teruskan bersama kami di Astro Awani, berita sekejap dimensi. Salam hormat.